What if I told you that one of the world's most fertile and wealthy lands, a land that had fed empires for centuries, changed hands in less than 3 years? That a rising power from the deserts of Arabia swept into the Nile Valley and ended nearly 700 years of Roman rule? This is the story of the Arab conquest of Egypt, a tale of ambition, strategy, faith, and the meeting of two worlds. Egypt on the eve of conquest. In the early 7th century, Egypt was not an independent kingdom. It was a province of the Byzantine Empire, known for centuries as Rome's breadbasket. Its fertile Nile delta supplied grain not only to the Egyptian population, but also to the great cities of the empire, especially Constantinople. Whoever controlled Egypt held a crucial advantage in wealth, food supply, and strategic position between the Mediterranean and the Red Sea. However, beneath the surface, Egypt was a province in decline and unrest. The Byzantine Empire had been locked in a brutal war with the Sasanian Persian Empire from 602 to 628 CE. This war devastated many provinces, drained imperial resources, and left populations exhausted. Egypt had been invaded by the Persians in 619 CE, and although it was recaptured by the Byzantines a decade later, the scars remained: economic disruption, weakened defenses, and lingering political instability, religious tensions, and internal division. Perhaps the most important factor that made Egypt vulnerable was not military weakness, but deep religious division. The vast majority of Egyptians were Miaphysite Christians, also known as Copts, who rejected the official imperial doctrine of Chalcedonian Christianity. The Byzantine authorities, based in Constantinople, had spent decades trying to impose their religious orthodoxy on the Coptic population. This often meant persecution, removal of native clergy, and heavy taxation for those seen as heretics. To many Egyptians, Byzantine rule felt more like an occupation than a shared empire. While the Copts were Christians, their loyalty to the Byzantine emperor was strained, and in some cases non-existent. This tension would play a pivotal role in how the Arabs were received when they marched into Egypt. The rise of the Arab Muslim power. While Egypt was under Byzantine control, another power was rising in the east, the Arab Muslim state, born from the unification of the Arabian Peninsula under the Prophet Muhammad, and, after his death in 632 CE, under the leadership of the caliphs. By 636 CE, under the second Caliph Umar ibn al-Khattab, the Arabs had already achieved stunning victories. They had crushed the Persian forces in Iraq and inflicted decisive defeats on the Byzantines in the Levant, most notably at the Battle of Yarmouk. These victories not only secured Muslim control over Syria and Palestine, but also opened the road to Egypt. Strategic importance of Egypt. From the Muslim perspective, Egypt was not simply another conquest. It was a strategic prize for several reasons. Wealth and agriculture. Egypt's grain production could sustain the growing Muslim territories. Trade routes. Control of Egypt meant controlling access to the Mediterranean and the Red Sea. Byzantine weakness. With the empire reeling from losses in the Levant, Egypt's defense was expected to be under-resourced and disorganized. Religious and political opportunity. Discontent among the Coptic majority could be leveraged to weaken Byzantine resistance. Amr ibn Ali with Macron, the man chosen for the task. The man entrusted with leading the campaign was Amr ibn Ali with Macron, a companion of the Prophet Muhammad, known for his political shrewdness and military skill. Amr had already played a significant role in the conquest of Palestine and was familiar with the region's geography and politics. According to early Islamic sources, Amr initially suggested the idea of invading Egypt to Caliph Umar. The Caliph was cautious. Egypt was vast, well-fortified, and distant from the Arabian heartlands. But after considering Egypt's potential value and the recent Byzantine defeats, Umar gave the go-ahead, albeit with conditions. If Amr could reach Egyptian territory quickly and secure an early foothold, he could proceed. If not, he was to turn back. The march into the unknown. In late 639 CE, 18 AH, Amr ibn La with Macron set out from Palestine with around 4,000 troops, a modest force compared to the scale of the mission. These soldiers were mostly hardened veterans of the Syrian and Palestinian campaigns, accustomed to fighting disciplined Byzantine forces and surviving in harsh conditions. The army moved through the Sinai Peninsula, a challenging route of desert terrain, limited water, and the constant risk of Byzantine patrols. Early Muslim chroniclers emphasized the speed and determination of Amr's march. He knew that hesitation could give the Byzantines time to reinforce Egypt. Byzantine Egypt's defenses. At this time, the Byzantine military presence in Egypt was organized around fortified cities and strategic points along the Nile. The Dux military commander of Egypt was responsible for both defense and civil administration, but the Byzantine system relied heavily on strongholds like Pelusium, Babylon fortress, near modern Cairo, and Alexandria. However, the garrisons were under strength, and morale was low. The war with Persia had drained manpower, and the loss of Syria had cut Egypt off from direct land connections with other Byzantine territories. The first clashes, Pelusium. The first significant confrontation of the campaign was at Pelusium, a fortified town guarding the eastern entrance to the Nile Delta. Sometimes called the gateway to Egypt, Pelusium had historically been the first obstacle for any invading army coming from the east. Amr's forces besieged Pelusium for about a month. While details of the battle vary between sources, most agree that the Muslim army eventually breached the defenses through a combination of persistence, tactical maneuvering, and exploiting weaknesses in the garrison's resolve. Pelusium fell, giving the Muslims their first major foothold in Egypt. Reactions of the Copts. One of the most debated questions among historians is, how did the native Egyptians respond to the Muslim advance? Contemporary Coptic sources are limited, but later accounts suggest that many Copts viewed the Muslim arrival as a potential liberation from Byzantine religious oppression. It's important to note that this doesn't mean the Copts immediately embraced Muslim rule. Taxation, cultural differences, and religious divides remained. However, the lack of unified resistance from the Egyptian population significantly aided the Muslim campaign. In some cases, local communities may have even provided supplies or intelligence to the invaders, either out of genuine hope for better treatment or simple pragmatism. Caliph Umar's reinforcements. After securing Pelusium, Amr sent word to Caliph Umar requesting reinforcements. Recognizing the momentum, Umar dispatched around 4,000 more troops under the command of Zubair ibn al-Awwam, another prominent companion of the Prophet. This doubled the Muslim force and provided much-needed manpower for the sieges to come. The road to Babylon fortress. With Pelusium taken, Amr's next objective was the Babylon fortress, a massive Byzantine stronghold that controlled the approach to Upper Egypt and protected the route to Alexandria. This was no small task. The fortress was heavily fortified and strategically located near the Nile, with high walls and a large garrison. But before reaching Babylon, Amr's army would have to secure more territory, navigate the complex geography of the Nile Delta, and face Byzantine counterattacks. The siege of Babylon fortress. With Pelusium now in Muslim hands, Amr ibn La with Macron wasted no time. The victory had given his army a strategic entry point into the Nile Delta, but the real challenge still lay ahead. To control Egypt, they would have to capture the Babylon fortress, the gateway to the heart of the country. Approach to Babylon. The march from Pelusium to Babylon was not a straight line across open land. The Muslim army had to navigate a maze of canals, marshes, and river branches. The Nile Delta's geography could be as much an enemy as the Byzantine soldiers, and supply lines were always at risk from local skirmishes. The Byzantines, though shaken, were not idle. They had pulled back to consolidate forces at Babylon and along the Nile. Babylon fortress was no ordinary stronghold. Located near the modern-day city of Cairo, its walls stood high and thick, built of massive stone blocks that had withstood centuries of assaults. The fortress commanded the approach to Upper Egypt and controlled the main route to Alexandria, the capital and economic hub of Byzantine Egypt. Taking it would be a decisive blow, but also a monumental challenge: the fortress and its defenders. Inside Babylon, the Byzantine commander Theodorus had assembled a garrison of both Byzantine regulars and local auxiliaries. Though morale was shaken by the loss of Pelusium, the fortress was considered almost impregnable. The Byzantines had stocked it with provisions, weapons, and reinforcements from other parts of Egypt. The fortress sat near the Nile, allowing for resupply by river. Its towers provided commanding views of the surrounding area, making surprise attacks almost impossible. If the Muslims could not breach its walls, they risked being bogged down in a long siege that could allow Byzantine reinforcements from the Mediterranean to arrive. The first assault. Amr knew that speed was critical. As soon as his forces arrived, they launched probing attacks to test the defenses. The Byzantines repelled these initial assaults with volleys of arrows, stones, and boiling oil. Every attempt to approach the gates was met with fierce resistance. Realizing a direct storming of the walls would be costly and likely unsuccessful, Amr shifted tactics. The siege became a game of attrition, cutting off supplies, harassing any relief attempts, and pressuring the defenders into a prolonged state of exhaustion. Coptic diplomacy. During the siege, Amr opened channels of negotiation with local Coptic leaders. He promised them religious freedom and fair treatment if they refrained from aiding the Byzantines. The Copts, who had suffered decades of religious persecution under imperial rule, were cautiously receptive. Some accounts suggest that Coptic communities near Babylon began quietly cooperating with the Muslim forces, providing intelligence about supply movements or even selling food to the besiegers. This did not mean the Copts had fully embraced the new rulers, but it weakened Byzantine logistical support. Arrival of reinforcements. The siege dragged on for months, and Amr's men began to feel the strain. Supplies were tight, and the fortress still held strong. In response to Amr's earlier request, Caliph Umar sent a fresh contingent of around 4,000 troops under the command of Zubair ibn al-Awwam, a seasoned warrior famed for his bravery. Zubair's arrival changed the dynamics. With more troops, Amr could rotate units, maintain constant pressure on the fortress, and block potential escape routes more effectively. The breakthrough. According to later Muslim chroniclers, Zubair proposed a daring plan. A small team of warriors would scale the fortress walls at night, creating panic inside and opening the gates for the main army. Under cover of darkness, the climbers ascended using ropes and grappling hooks. Once inside, they fought their way to the gates, killing guards and allowing the besiegers to pour in. The sudden breach shattered Byzantine morale. Fierce street fighting erupted inside Babylon, but the outcome was now inevitable. By early April 641 CE, the fortress had fallen. Impact of the victory. The fall of Babylon was a turning point. It gave the Muslims control of Lower Egypt's interior routes and placed them in striking distance of Alexandria. It also sent shockwaves across the province. If the supposedly impregnable Babylon could be taken, nowhere was truly safe. For the Byzantines, the loss was a disaster. Egypt's defensive system relied on holding key fortresses to slow down invaders. With Babylon gone, Alexandria itself became the last major bastion in the province. Negotiations and a temporary truce. After the fortress's capture, Amr opened negotiations with Cyrus of Alexandria, the Byzantine-appointed patriarch and civil governor of Egypt. Cyrus was a controversial figure, both a religious leader and a political enforcer of imperial doctrine. He had a reputation for persecuting the Coptic majority, but he was also pragmatic. Cyrus agreed to a temporary truce with Amr, reportedly lasting several months. During this time, the Byzantines considered their options, whether to reinforce Alexandria or abandon Egypt altogether. For Amr, the truce allowed his forces to rest, reorganize, and prepare for the next phase, the march to Alexandria. The strategic dilemma. The road to Alexandria was not without challenges. The city was heavily fortified, surrounded by walls, and defended by the sea on one side. Byzantine naval power still dominated the eastern Mediterranean, meaning reinforcements and supplies could reach Alexandria by sea. To take the city, Amr would need more than military force. He would need to exploit the divisions between Byzantines and Copts, maintain his army's morale far from home, and prevent a naval-based counterattack from cutting off his advance, that a province on the brink. By mid-641 CE, Egypt was a province in flux. The Muslim forces held much of the eastern Nile Delta and the crucial Babylon stronghold. The Byzantines retained Alexandria and a few scattered strongpoints. The Copts watched events unfold, wary of both sides, but sensing the old imperial order was crumbling. The stage was now set for the decisive confrontation that would determine Egypt's future. Alexandria, the jewel of the Mediterranean, the city of ancient scholars, traders, and rulers, was about to face its greatest test: the siege and fall of Alexandria. With Babylon fortress in Muslim hands and a temporary truce in place, Amr ibn Ali with Macron turned his attention to the ultimate prize, Alexandria. For centuries, this great Mediterranean city had been Egypt's beating heart, a hub of trade, scholarship, and administration. It was the Byzantine Empire's second city after Constantinople and the last stronghold keeping Egypt tied to the imperial world. If Alexandria fell, Egypt would be lost to Byzantium. The jewel of the Mediterranean, Alexandria in the 7th century was still a city of extraordinary importance. Its harbors teemed with merchant ships from across the Mediterranean. Massive stone walls encircled it, reinforced by towers and gates. To the north, the sea provided a natural defense, while to the south and east lay canals and marshes that hindered overland assault. Its defenders were a mix of Byzantine regular troops, local auxiliaries, and sailors from the imperial fleet. Even weakened by years of war, Alexandria remained a formidable challenge. March to the city. Leaving a garrison at Babylon to maintain control over the interior, Amr led his army westward along the Nile, avoiding direct confrontation until he reached the approaches to Alexandria. The journey itself was not without danger. The Byzantines launched small-scale raids from the city to harass the Muslim columns. By the time Amr reached the outskirts of Alexandria, the Byzantine defenders had fortified their positions and were prepared for a long siege. Beginning of the siege. The siege began in the summer of 641 CE. The Muslim army encamped around the landward approaches, blocking roads and cutting supply lines from the countryside. However, Alexandria's connection to the sea meant that Byzantine ships could still deliver food, reinforcements, and weapons from other imperial territories. This created a frustrating stalemate. The Muslims could not fully isolate the city without a naval force of their own, something they lacked entirely at this stage of their expansion. Diplomacy and propaganda. Amr understood that sheer force might not be enough. He reached out to the Coptic population in and around the city, repeating his promises of religious tolerance and lighter taxation compared to Byzantine rule. While many Copts still hesitated to openly support the Muslims, the ongoing siege and Byzantine inability to protect the countryside made collaboration more tempting. Some Copts quietly provided intelligence, pointing out weak points in the walls, reporting troop movements, and warning of planned sorties. This information was invaluable in tightening the siege. Skirmishes and attrition. The siege was not a static affair. The Byzantines launched frequent sallies to push the Muslims back from the walls, sometimes with temporary success. The fighting was often brutal, with heavy casualties on both sides. Amr responded by shifting camp positions and conducting night raids on the city's outskirts, burning supply depots and ambushing foraging parties. Over time, the constant pressure began to wear down the defenders. Byzantine political turmoil. While the siege dragged on, events far away in Constantinople had a direct impact. Emperor Heraclius, who had ruled for over 3 decades, died in February 641 CE. His death sparked a period of political instability, with disputes over succession and the empire's strategic priorities. Egypt, though important, was now competing for imperial attention with threats on other frontiers, including the ever-growing Muslim presence in the Levant and the continuing Persian recovery in the east. This meant fewer reinforcements for Alexandria, and the troops inside the city began to feel increasingly abandoned. Negotiations with Cyrus, As the months wore on, Amr reopened negotiations with Cyrus of Alexandria. The Patriarch governor was pragmatic enough to recognize that the city's situation was deteriorating. According to Muslim sources, Cyrus agreed to terms that would spare Alexandria from destruction. The Byzantines would withdraw from the city peacefully. In return, the Muslims would guarantee the safety of its inhabitants and their property. The Coptic Church would be allowed to function without interference. However, this agreement required imperial approval, and not all Byzantine commanders in the city were willing to accept it. The final push. In late summer 641 CE, with talks stalling and supplies running low, Amr ordered a coordinated assault on the city's landward walls. Siege engines hurled stones, archers provided covering fire, and assault teams tried to breach the gates. The fighting was intense. In some sectors, the Byzantines held firm, but in others, Muslim troops managed to gain footholds on the walls. Zubair ibn al-Awwam, the same commander who had distinguished himself at Babylon, reportedly played a key role in scaling a section of the defenses and breaking through. Once the walls were compromised, panic spread inside the city. Realizing further resistance would only bring destruction, the defenders began to withdraw toward the harbor. The surrender of Alexandria. By September 641 CE, Alexandria surrendered. Byzantine forces evacuated by sea, leaving Egypt effectively in Muslim hands. The city's fall marked the end of over 6 centuries of Greco-Roman rule in Egypt. For the Muslims, it was a triumph of both strategy and endurance. They had overcome one of the most heavily defended cities in the Mediterranean without a navy of their own, relying instead on persistence, diplomacy, and exploiting their enemies' political disarray. Aftermath and transition. The capture of Alexandria did not mean instant stability. Muslim administrators now had to integrate Egypt into the rapidly expanding caliphate. Amr ibn al-Makron was appointed governor, with his headquarters initially in Alexandria, but later moved inland to a new garrison city, Fustat, which would grow into the nucleus of modern Cairo. For the Copts, the change of rulers was profound. The Byzantine religious hierarchy was dismantled, and while the Muslims imposed the jizya tax on non-Muslims, the Coptic Church gained a measure of autonomy it had lacked under Byzantine rule. For Byzantium, the loss was catastrophic. Egypt's grain and revenue had been essential to the empire's survival. Without it, the Byzantine state became far more vulnerable to future Muslim advances in North Africa. A fragile hold. Even as the Muslims celebrated, they knew their grip on Egypt was not unshakable. The Byzantines still had powerful fleets and could attempt a reconquest. And indeed, less than a decade later, Alexandria would briefly return to Byzantine hands before being retaken. But for now, in the closing months of 641 CE, the Arab conquest of Egypt stood as one of the most remarkable campaigns of the early Islamic expansion, swift, determined, and transformative. The Byzantine counterattack. The fall of Alexandria in 641 CE had been a staggering blow to the Byzantine Empire. It had not only lost one of its richest provinces, but also a strategic cornerstone of Mediterranean trade and supply. Yet in Constantinople, the loss was not accepted as final. The imperial fleet still ruled the seas, and Egypt's long coastline made it vulnerable to a naval strike. For the new rulers of Egypt, the conquest was not yet secure. The Byzantines would come back. Egypt under Muslim administration. After the surrender of Alexandria, Amr ibn al-Makron set about establishing a stable administration. The city had been spared large-scale destruction, but Amr understood that holding it long-term would be risky. The Byzantines could blockade or retake it at any time with their navy. To avoid dependence on the vulnerable coastal city, he founded a new administrative and military capital further inland, Fustat, near the captured Babylon fortress. From there, the Muslim garrison could control the Nile routes, quickly move into the Delta or Upper Egypt, and remain out of immediate reach of a naval assault. In Fustat, Amr began organizing tax collection, integrating Coptic officials into the bureaucracy, and reassuring local communities that their lands and livelihoods would be respected. The policy was pragmatic, Egypt's wealth depended on cooperation from its farmers and merchants, not on constant military occupation. The Byzantine plan for reconquest. Meanwhile, in Constantinople, the young Emperor Constans II inherited an empire under threat on multiple fronts. Losing Egypt meant losing the empire's primary grain supply, weakening both its economy and its ability to feed the capital. Constans II decided to launch a bold operation to retake Egypt. The strategy was to use the empire's superior navy to land troops directly in Alexandria, bypassing Muslim-held inland routes. With a strong garrison in the city, Byzantine forces could then push south along the Nile and reconnect with any local resistance to Muslim rule. The surprise landing. In 645 CE, just 4 years after Alexandria's fall, the Byzantine fleet appeared suddenly off the coast. Their arrival took the Muslim garrison by surprise. Naval power was still something the early caliphate could not match. Byzantine troops landed quickly and moved into the city, rallying remaining loyalists and fortifying their positions. Alexandria was once again in Byzantine hands, at least temporarily. Amr's response. The news of Alexandria's recapture reached Fustat swiftly. Amr ibn Ali with Macron, still governor, acted without hesitation. He gathered his forces and marched toward the coast, determined not to let the Byzantines re-establish a foothold. Unlike the long siege of 641 CE, this campaign had to be rapid. If the Byzantines could fully secure Alexandria and resupply it by sea, they might hold out indefinitely, or worse, launch inland operations that could undo the entire conquest. The battle for Alexandria. When Amr's forces arrived, they found the Byzantines well entrenched. However, the Muslim army had several advantages. Experience in Egyptian terrain. After years of campaigning in the Nile Delta, they knew the land better than their enemies. Coptic neutrality. The Coptic population, having enjoyed relative freedom under Muslim rule, had little enthusiasm for a Byzantine return. Speed and coordination. Amr wasted no time in surrounding the city's landward approaches, cutting it off from the countryside. The fighting was fierce. Muslim sources speak of intense street battles and heavy casualties on both sides. The Byzantines fought with the desperation of men trying to reclaim a lost empire. The Muslims fought with the determination of men defending a hard-won prize. The final expulsion. After a series of engagements in and around the city, the Byzantines realized they could not hold Alexandria without control of the surrounding territory. Their supply lines by sea were vulnerable to constant harassment, and without local support, every foray inland met resistance. Recognizing the futility of their position, the Byzantine commanders ordered an evacuation. Their fleet carried the surviving troops back across the Mediterranean, leaving Egypt in Muslim hands once more. This time, it was final. There would be no serious Byzantine attempt to retake Egypt again. Securing the province. Following the victory, Amr reinforced Alexandria, but maintained his decision to keep the capital in Fustat. The city remained an important port and commercial hub, but the political and military heart of Muslim Egypt would stay inland, protected from sudden naval strikes. Coptic leaders, who had been wary of the reconquest attempt, now realized that Muslim rule was here to stay. In return for the payment of the jizya tax, they were largely left to manage their own religious and communal affairs. Many historians argue that this autonomy, however limited, was preferable to the harsh Byzantine religious policies of the past. The shift in Mediterranean power. The failure of the Byzantine reconquest of Egypt marked a turning point in the balance of power in the Mediterranean. The empire had lost its richest province, its primary grain source, and a key link between Europe and the Red Sea trade routes. For the Caliphate, Egypt was now a permanent part of its territory, a jewel that would finance further expansion into North Africa and beyond. The fertile Nile Valley, the bustling ports, and the strategic location between Africa and Asia became vital to the economic and military strength of the Muslim world. Amr ibn Ali with Macron, the conqueror and administrator. By the late 640s, Amr ibn Ali with Macron was not just a general. He was the architect of Muslim Egypt. He had proven his ability to wage war, negotiate with local populations, and organize governance. His tenure saw the beginnings of Egypt's integration into the caliphate's administrative system, which would continue to evolve over the centuries. The success of the Reconquest offense also solidified the lesson learned at Alexandria. The Mediterranean was still a Byzantine domain, and the caliphate's future expansion would require a navy capable of challenging imperial fleets. This realization would soon lead to the development of the first Muslim naval forces, the siege of Alexandria, and the collapse of Byzantine control. The Arab conquest of Egypt had reached a pivotal moment. By the spring of 641 CE, Amr ibn al-As and his forces had already taken control of much of the Nile Delta and many key strategic towns. Yet one city remained the jewel of Byzantine Egypt, Alexandria, the glittering capital, the gateway to the Mediterranean, and one of the most important cities in the entire Eastern Roman Empire. Alexandria, the last bastion. Alexandria in the 7th century was a city of immense prestige and economic weight. It was a hub of trade, scholarship, and maritime power, home to the famous, though by now partly diminished, great libraries legacy, grand palaces, bustling harbors, and a diverse population. Alexandria was also the nerve center for Byzantine administration in Egypt. But its greatest importance to the Byzantines lay in its role as the empire's breadbasket. For centuries, Egypt's fertile lands had supplied grain to Constantinople and other key cities. Losing Alexandria would mean not just a political defeat, but an economic wound that could cripple the Byzantine state. The city was well fortified. Its walls were massive, and its harbors could be defended by the Byzantine navy. Inside, a determined garrison of soldiers, along with local supporters of the empire, prepared for a long siege. Amr's strategy for the final push. Amr ibn al-As understood that Alexandria could not be taken by brute force alone. The Byzantine navy remained a threat, capable of reinforcing and resupplying the city from the sea. The Arab forces, largely land-based, lacked a strong naval arm in this campaign. Thus, Amr adopted a dual approach: cut off the land routes to starve the city of supplies from the Nile Delta, wear down morale through raids, skirmishes, and psychological pressure. Arab forces established camps and watch points along key roads. They disrupted any movement of grain or provisions, choking the city's lifeline. They also engaged in small-scale attacks to keep the defenders under constant pressure without committing to a costly direct assault. The role of the Egyptian population. By this point in the campaign, the Coptic Christian majority in Egypt had grown increasingly disillusioned with Byzantine rule. Heavy taxation, religious persecution under the imperial church, and the devastation of war had eroded their loyalty. While not all actively supported the Arab forces, many refused to aid the Byzantines. In some cases, Coptic communities even provided food, intelligence, or guides to Amr's troops. This local cooperation, or at least neutrality, deprived the Byzantines of much-needed allies inside Egypt. Byzantine countermoves. Inside Alexandria, the Byzantine garrison, led by the imperial prefect, prepared for a drawn-out defense. The walls were repaired, siege engines positioned, and the harbor fortified. Messages were sent to Constantinople urging Emperor Heraclius for reinforcements. The emperor's health, however, was failing, and his resources were stretched thin. The empire was still reeling from decades of exhausting wars against the Persians and the early Arab conquests in Syria and Palestine. Although Heraclius ordered naval support to relieve Alexandria, the aid that came was limited and dangerously delayed. The Arab advance tightens. By late 641 CE, Amr's forces had successfully isolated Alexandria by land. Control over the surrounding countryside meant the Byzantines inside were reliant almost entirely on the sea for supplies. Amr ordered the construction of siege works and established strongholds close to the city's outer defenses. Chroniclers describe intermittent exchanges of missiles, as well as sorties by the Byzantine defenders attempting to push the Arabs back. While these clashes were fierce, they failed to break the encirclement. The psychological battle. The siege was not just a contest of arms. It was a war of endurance and morale. Inside the city, food shortages began to appear, and the population, a mix of Greeks, Copts, Jews, and foreigners, started to feel the strain. Arab forces took advantage of this by sending envoys to the city offering generous terms of surrender, safety for civilians, protection of property, and freedom of worship for Christians and Jews. This contrasted sharply with the harsh reputation the Byzantine tax collectors had earned over the years. These offers sowed seeds of doubt among Alexandria's residents. While many soldiers were determined to fight, sections of the civilian population began urging the authorities to negotiate. The death of Heraclius and the empire's distraction. In February 641 CE, Emperor Heraclius died. His death plunged the Byzantine court into political uncertainty, as his successors grappled with succession disputes and the empire's growing military crises. This instability further reduced the chances of a strong relief effort for Alexandria. The Byzantine navy, though formidable, could not single-handedly reverse the situation without a coordinated land campaign, something the new leadership was in no position to organize. The fall of the city. By the summer of 641 CE, the defenders' resolve had begun to crack. The Arab forces, sensing an opportunity, intensified their pressure. Skirmishes at the gates turned into more aggressive assaults, while internal dissent in Alexandria's governing council weakened the unity of command. Finally, a negotiated settlement was reached. Accounts vary in detail, but most agree that Alexandria surrendered under terms that allowed the Byzantine garrison to withdraw, civilians to remain unharmed, and religious freedom to be respected. In September 641 CE, Amr ibn al-As entered Alexandria, not as a conqueror laying waste, but as a victor securing one of the greatest prizes of the early Islamic expansion. The city's famed lighthouse, harbors, and palaces now came under Muslim control. The strategic consequences. The fall of Alexandria was more than just a military victory. It marked the end of over 600 years of Greco-Roman rule in Egypt. For the Byzantines, it was a devastating blow. Egypt had been the empire's breadbasket and a key revenue source. Its loss meant Constantinople now had to import grain from farther afield, increasing costs and vulnerability. For the Arab Caliphate, Egypt became one of its most valuable provinces. Its fertile lands would sustain armies, feed populations, and provide immense tax revenues for decades to come. But the war was not over. Despite the Arab victory, the Byzantines did not give up entirely. The empire still possessed a strong navy and a determination to reclaim Alexandria. In the years immediately following the city's fall, they would mount attempts to retake it, leading to further clashes and a reassertion of Arab control. This set the stage for the final consolidation of Muslim power in Egypt, which would shape the region's political and cultural trajectory for centuries. The cultural collision and the seeds of nationalism. As the British Empire tightened its grip on Asia, something began to stir beneath the surface, something the empire neither fully understood nor could entirely control. This was not a rebellion of guns and swords, at least not yet. It was a rebellion of the mind. British rule brought with it railways, telegraphs, newspapers, and schools, tools intended to serve the empire's administrative needs. But these very tools became the channels through which ideas of independence, identity, and unity began to spread. The cultural collision. For centuries, the cultures of Asia had evolved independently, deeply rooted in their own traditions, religions, and languages. The British, however, introduced Western education, legal systems, and even dress codes. To the empire, this was modernization. To many locals, it felt like cultural intrusion. Imagine being told that your way of life, your customs, your governance, even your beliefs, were backward compared to British ideals. It was a slow erosion of pride, and over time, resentment simmered. But there was a twist. Some embraced these Western ideas, using them to challenge the very authority that introduced them. The birth of a new class. In cities like Calcutta, Bombay, Rangoon, and Singapore, a new class of educated elites emerged. They spoke English fluently, studied British political philosophy, and were trained in British law. Ironically, this gave them the intellectual weapons to question imperial rule. Newspapers began to publish bold critiques of British policies. Political associations formed, not yet revolutionary armies, but seeds of organized resistance. These were the early days of movements that, in decades to come, would demand not reform, but freedom. The empire's blind spot. The British, confident in their superiority, often dismissed these currents of dissent as harmless intellectual chatter. But they underestimated the power of shared grievances. Across Asia, from India to Burma, from Malaya to Hong Kong, the same story repeated. Infrastructure meant to bind the empire together was quietly binding its subjects into a network of resistance. The spiritual undercurrent. And then there was the deeper, almost spiritual backlash. Missionary activity and cultural policies often clashed with local religions. Temples, mosques, and monasteries became not just places of worship, but centers of quiet political organization. Leaders began to fuse national identity with cultural and religious pride, turning resistance into something far more potent than mere politics. It became a fight for the soul of the nation. The stage was set. The empire had, without realizing it, awakened the very forces that would one day undo it. But that reckoning was still to come. The end of the Ottoman Empire. By the dawn of the 20th century, the Ottoman Empire, once stretching from the gates of Vienna to the deserts of Arabia, was no longer the unshakable power it had been for centuries. The empire, already called the sick man of Europe by rival powers, was crumbling under the weight of corruption, economic stagnation, nationalist uprisings, and foreign intervention. Internally, the diverse ethnic and religious makeup of the empire, which had once been its strength, now became a source of division. Arab nationalists in the Middle East, Armenian independence movements in Anatolia, and Balkan uprisings all strained the empire's grip on its territories. The Young Turk Revolution of 1908 briefly brought hope for reform, promising a constitutional monarchy and modernization. But it could not undo centuries of decline. Externally, the European powers, Britain, France, Russia, and later Italy, were circling like vultures. The Balkan Wars of 1912 to 1913 saw the Ottomans lose nearly all of their European lands. What remained of their empire was now a fragile, overstretched shadow of its former self. Then came the final blow, World War I. Aligning with the Central Powers, the Ottoman Empire fought fiercely, achieving stunning victories like Gallipoli, yet suffering catastrophic defeats elsewhere. British forces, backed by Arab revolts, pushed deep into the Middle East, capturing Jerusalem, Baghdad, and Damascus. The empire's war effort drained its economy and military beyond recovery. In 1918, the Armistice of Mudros ended Ottoman participation in the war. But the peace was not merciful. The Treaty of Sèvres in 1920 carved up Ottoman lands among the victors. Anatolia itself faced foreign occupation. Yet in the heart of the ruins, a new figure rose, Mustafa Kemal Ataturk. Leading the Turkish War of Independence, Ataturk expelled foreign forces, abolished the Sultanate in 1922, and on October 29, 1923, declared the Republic of Turkey. With this, the Ottoman Empire, after more than 6 centuries of rule, was no more. Legacy of the Ottomans. The Ottoman Empire left behind a complex and contradictory legacy. It was a civilization of grand architecture, intricate legal systems, cultural fusion, and vast trade networks. Its influence stretched across Europe, the Middle East, and North Africa, shaping art, cuisine, language, and governance. Yet, it was also an empire of conquest, political intrigue, and strict control over its diverse populations. Its fall marked not just the end of an era, but the beginning of a new geopolitical order, one that still shapes conflicts and alliances today. Even now, the echoes of the Ottomans can be seen in Istanbul's skyline, in the spices of Middle Eastern kitchens, in the rhythms of Balkan music, and in the borders drawn after its collapse. It was an empire that once ruled the crossroads of the world, and though it is gone, its shadow remains.